So President Trump just told cost-cutting Republicans to stand down. On Truth Social, he said, remember, you still have to get reelected. Don't go too crazy. We'll make it all up times 10 with growth more than ever before. The translation here is that the plan isn't to cut spending. It's to juice the economy with tax cuts, spend billions more, and cover the gap by borrowing trillions. Because no one gets reelected by tightening belts. And that's exactly what the big, beautiful bill is all about. Let's break it down. So the U.S. Senate passed this sweeping tax and spending package on July 1st by the narrowest margin possible, 51-50, with Vice President J.D. Vance breaking the tie. As of now, it's not yet law. The House still needs to approve it, but if passed, it would blow the doors off of federal finances. First, the debt ceiling. This bill raises the cap from $36.146 trillion to $46.146 trillion, an increase of $5 trillion to avoid default and fund the next leg of the American debt binge. That alone tells you everything you need to know about how serious the government is about restraint. They're not. And second is taxes. Rather than increasing revenue, the bill slashes it, a net $3.8 trillion in tax cuts over the next decade. This is phenomenal. The 2017 tax cuts are made permanent, overtime and tips become untaxed, and middle-income Americans save a few $100, high earners save the most. So revenue down by trillions, and the third being spending. It's going way up. $350 billion for defense and the border wall, and $25 billion for rural hospitals, billions for NASA, new missile systems, and a National Garden of American heroes. But even after some program cuts like reductions to Medicaid, SNAP, and green energy credits, the bill still adds an estimated $3.3 trillion to the national debt over 10 years. So what's the actual plan? Run it hot. Stimulate demand, keep borrowing, and inflate the debt away. But here's what they won't say out loud. The deficit cannot be reduced. You can see right here, this is the federal deficit as a percentage of GDP. I'll explain this in a moment. But the deficit can't be reduced. Not politically, not mathematically, not structurally. Right now, the federal deficit is running at 6.6% of GDP. With a $28 trillion economy, that's a $1.85 trillion gap between what the government spends and what it takes in. So typically, during normal periods, the deficit can run anywhere from 2% to 4% of GDP, but during wartime, it rises to 6% or more. Currently, it's 6.6%, but we're not at war and we're not in recession. This has just become standard practice. And if they did try to remove it, that would mean cutting spending or raising taxes, both of which pull money out of the economy. So government spending is a direct input into GDP, right? So cutting it would drag GDP down. Even small reductions in the deficit shrink output by more than the raw dollar amount because of the multiplier effect. So they won't reduce the deficit because they can't reduce the deficit because at the federal level, the Federal Reserve is incentivized to ensure that GDP does not go negative for 2 consecutive quarters. So they'll just keep borrowing to bridge it. Our incentives are completely misaligned in this country. Rather than focusing on individual prosperity, we're focusing on making GDP go up, even if it's at the expense of America's own citizens over a long enough time horizon. And Trump's telling you that plainly. We'll make it all up with growth, is what he said, but you can't grow out of a problem like this. The U.S. debt to GDP ratio is already over 120%. Even if we average 3% GDP for a decade, which we won't, it won't outpace a debt load growing 8 to 10% annually. It's mathematically impossible. The only way out is devaluation, inflation, currency debasement, endless U.S. Treasury issuance that gets at some stage monetized by the Fed. Now, I'm not a U.S. Treasury doomer. I'm not saying that U.S. Treasuries aren't going to find a buyer tomorrow, but when auction sizes just won't stop increasing, it becomes a global problem for individuals and businesses. And that's why Bitcoin matters more than ever. It's the only asset engineered to sit outside the system. It's the apex hedge against it. A system that can't cut costs, can't close deficits, and won't stop borrowing, and is now openly embracing debt-fueled growth as its permanent operating model. So Bitcoin allows you to insulate yourself from a debt ceiling that just never stops rising, whether you're an individual, a household, or a company. And the companies are catching on. Strategy started the wave. Now there's over 200 public companies with Bitcoin on their balance sheet. This isn't a fad. It's the beginning of a new buying cohort because of the problem I just described. Corporate treasuries do not want their cash debased. And in the same way, if you're sitting on equity or idle capital and wondering how to make your balance sheet future-proof, it's time to check out Horizon. Horizon lets you stack Bitcoin using dormant home equity without additional monthly payments or interest charges. Because if the U.S. is going to run it hot, you need to run your life cold, hard, and sovereign. Stack Bitcoin using your home equity. You can check it out at joinhorizon.com or by scanning the QR code right there. That's all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.